Thank you, Andre. And I'd like to welcome all of the participants. This, of course, is a virtual presentation, which has become more common since COVID came into play. But it allows us to bridge time and space, which can be expensive if we all had to travel to a common location. And I think we live in a time where we need to be strong enough to deal with these virtual realities, which are becoming more of a factor in our everyday lives and businesses, homes, and the lives of our children and friends. And I think we live in very challenging times, and the Anthroposophical Society has a great deal to offer out of anthroposophy to help individuals and humanity as a whole to meet these challenges. I wanted to start with this verse for America that Rudolf Steiner gave. May our feeling penetrate to the center point of our hearts and seek in love to unite itself with human beings of like goal and with spirit beings full of grace, who strengthen us from realms of light and illuminate our love while gazing down on our earnest, heartfelt striving. In order to face the mystery of good and evil, we need to take on a kind of spiritual knighthood. And in this, these verses, Karl Koenig helps to develop an imagination that can bring us into that mindset. The knighthood for the 21st century. There is a knighthood of the 21st century whose riders do not ride through the darkness of physical forces as of old, but through the forces of darkened minds. They are armed with a spiritual armor, and an inner sun makes them radiant. Out of them shines healing, healing that flows from the knowledge of the human being as a spiritual being. They must create inner order, inner justice, peace, and convictions in the darkness of our time. They must learn to work side by side with angels. In order to bring some of the empowerment that Anthroposophy, spiritual science, gives us, it is of importance to enter more deeply into the most important events of human and earth evolution, which occurred at the so-called turning point of time. In order to prepare the next age, the age of Philadelphia, brotherhood, which one could also refer to as a Sophian age, where the impulse of community will be more in the foreground. There needs to be a marriage of East and West. And if you look at this polarity of the Luke and Solomon, Nathan and Solomon, Jesus children that are referenced in the Luke and Matthew Gospels respectively, and attended by shepherds and kings. You can see on the left, the East being referenced there, where Buddha overlights this Nathan Jesus and bestows his Nirmanakaya. Rudolf Steiner tells us that Krishna was a manifestation of this same being that's celebrated in the Hindu tradition in the Bhagavad Gita. And in the case of Zarathustra, you have a being who incarnated many times and is a very mature soul and attained high levels of spiritual development. And the kings attend that birth, the three kings. So you have a kind of polarity that one could say relates to also the Abel aspect and the Cain aspect. Abel would be then related to the Nathan Jesus, and Rudolf Steiner speaks of how Zarathustra is really a brother soul to the Lazarus being, the Lazarus John being, who had formerly incarnated as the builder of Solomon's temple, who was epitomized the Cain stream. So you have a healing impulse that's meant to heal this rift between Cain and Abel. And you have the union of these two at the age of 12. And it's the Jesus of Nazareth is really the Nathan Jesus who lives to the age of 30, at which time then the Christ being, the solar logos, enters. This was all prepared by the lunar aspect of the logos that worked through the Hebrew people, Yahweh. And then the sixth Elohim, that our solar Elohim, entered the Jesus being at the baptism and lived then for 3 years on the earth, and then went through the mystery of Golgotha and then united with the earth. So the baptism is then really a cosmic event. This is sort of the exoteric aspect of the communion archetype. Do this in remembrance of me, are words that were spoken, where the bread and the wine become the body and the blood. And that, of course, is there within the ritual of the Catholic Church, although the wine was later left out only for the priest. And of course, in the Christian community, you have this. These are referencing the 7 Christian initiation steps: the foot washing, the scourging, the crowning of thorns, the cross bearing, the crucifixion, the atonement, and the resurrection. And I just have here to the left on the bottom, Peter said unto him, thou shalt never wash my feet. He saw this as kind of a condescension for Jesus. Jesus answered him, if I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. Simon Peter said unto him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus saith to him, he that is washed needeth not save to wash his feet. So the foot washing has a deep mystery. It's kind of a protection against the mystery of evil. In an esoteric lecture, Steiner speaks of how evil enters through the feet. And it's, of course, in the Piscean age that we live in. And that has to do with the feet, just like Aries with the forehead, the ram. And it's in this Piscean age that we really place our feet on the ground and come under the spell of gravity, especially during the last period of the Kali Yuga, which started in 3101 BC and ended in 1899. So since then, we're in a new age of light, although it doesn't seem like it's coming to expression very powerfully outwardly. Anthroposophy is a manifestation of that light. So it works on an occult level, and it's there in the aura of the earth that is being magnified through the second coming in our time. So the foot washing is also a community building. It's related to this new impulse of community that Steiner mentioned, to become each other's awakener, which means to see the higher in the other, see through to the higher self of the other and help to draw it forth, not just to be concerned about our own meditative work and inner development. There's a Grail theme that comes to expression in this mystery of Golgotha that infused the whole earth with new meaning. And the spear thrust of Longinus that's mentioned. You have then the Mars forces, which are usually aggressive, being used in a form of compassion. So it's like this theme of reforging the swords into plowshares. It's the redemption of these Mars forces. Buddha being sent to Mars is part of that mission. That Rosicrucian impulse has a great deal to do with. A central figure in this whole mystery related to what took place on Golgotha is then the beloved disciple, who was the only one of the 12 who stood beneath the cross. And it's there that he underwent a second initiation. The first initiation is at the center of the Gospel of John, which was written by this disciple. But one can really call it a Sophian gospel, because under the cross, there was a communion between John and the Sophia who had incorporated in the Maria being. So this is the Solomon Mary, but the Nathan Mary has united with her inwardly, which really took place at the time that the baptism took place. There was a conversation that Steiner mentions in the fifth gospel between Jesus and his mother, Solomon Mary. And there, that Logos word flowed from the Jesus being to the Maria being, filled with compassion of the three experiences that led him to become ready to become the vessel, which he soon becomes with the baptism in the Jordan. And it's during that conversation that then the Nathan Mary descends more deeply and the Sophia unites with the Maria being. So this is related to the words from the cross, "Woman, behold your son," and to Lazarus John, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his home, not just outwardly, but inwardly. They later moved to Ephesus, which is where the Logos Mysteries, the temple of Diana, had stood, and the remnants of it were still there. So they lived in that region together. So another aspect of this mystery of Golgotha was the earthquakes and the rending of the veil of the temple. Previously, only the high priest would enter that sacred space. And of course, the Grail mysteries related to the spear thrust, that blood that flows is sacred blood that is gathered by Joseph of Arimathea and is then the beginning of the Grail mystery stream, the Grail brotherhood. And ultimately, this has to do with the fact that the I am lived in that blood, the cosmic I am. And this is a words that I keep returning to, I think, are of tremendous significance that Rudolf Steiner gave in the esoteric school. With the event of Golgotha, when the blood flowed from the wounds of the great Redeemer, when the cosmic heart's blood penetrated the earth and its forces poured down as far as the center, the earth became illuminated from within and light rayed outward into the surroundings. The opportunity was then given to every single human individuality to experience this light within the self. When the earth became the body of the great sun spirit, through having been impregnated with his spirit powers, all the beings on earth were equally endowed with these forces. The seed was planted for the reunion of sun and earth. The physical body of Jesus of Nazareth was the mediator through which the powers of the cosmos were united with the earth aura. And when the blood flowed from the body on Golgotha, the earth was taken up again into the sun power. Since then, this Christ power streams from its center into the surroundings and from the sun. Christ's power streams into the earth. One is able to experience this power, this light within oneself as a human being when one knows oneself to be a part of the earth, which as Christ's physical body is infused with his being. Then white light streams towards one from within oneself as it streams out from the center of the earth. One could speak of a lemniscate between sun and earth that's related to a lemniscate between head and heart microcosmically. And that this relationship between the earth and the human being is related to the day-night rhythm is for the human being related to the spirit of the earth as a yearly rhythm. So there's a correspondence between our day rhythm and the yearly rhythm as lived by the planetary spirit, which is the Christ since the mystery of Golgotha. And that lemniscate moves in the winter. There is a waking up of the earth. The lemniscate is more strongly then united with the earth. In the summer, it's the other way, towards the sun. And in the spring and fall, Easter and Michaelmas, there's a balance. So this is a dynamic lemniscate. These forces didn't just involve abstract influence of light shining in the darkness. The Christ being actually entered that sphere and brought new light and brought the heavenly forces into the earth, which is the beginning of a future marriage of heaven and earth. So this is part of establishing that lemniscate and beginning this weaving between sun and earth. Steiner often mentioned how for the Greeks, there was a saying, it's better to be a beggar in the earthly realm than a king in the realm of shades, because that realm of the dead had darkened considerably. In the Rosicrucian mysteries, we hear of the ninefold layers of the interior of the earth. This is kind of an inversion of the 9 spheres of the heavenly world above. And generally, this is where the hell regions are. This is where the adversarial forces prevail. The first 3 layers, more the Luciferic. The next 3 layers, the Ahrimanic. And then the Azuric in the bottom 3. And at the middle of the earth, is where this battle for the future is focused. This is the same battle that microcosmically takes place at the pineal gland in the day-night rhythm, the morning and evening. If there is a polarization between our day consciousness and our night consciousness, where two different world orders and lawfulness prevail, then these two are in opposition to each other. And that then is expressed in a battle in the morning and evening. It's when we integrate this world that begins with the etheric and the angels and rises to the archangels and the archai, the spirits nearest to us. And we begin to have imagination, inspiration, intuitions. That's a way of harmonizing the day and the night. The night is a moral world order. The day is a physical world order, the natural laws. And so this is a redemption through those 7 stages of the first 7 layers. And then I point out below that the raising of Lazarus was a preparation to build a bridge between the 7th and the 9th layer. This 8th layer is where the battle between Cain and Abel is focused. And that raising of Lazarus was a healing of that rift between the Abel and the Cain stream. The fire earth is where the Ahrimanic forces are especially focused, and the 8th sphere, which has to do with the mystery of evil, enters into the interior of the earth and is very strongly woven into this fire earth, which is where volcanism comes from. So the more we're materialistic as a collective humanity, the more we're just living in the lower ego, the more we invite then these fire forces to erupt and create chaos. So the heavenly forces are a source of harmony. The interior of the earth is a source of chaos. And our weather conditions take place in between meteorological events. So if we don't create a balance between the two, if we instead take materialism beyond its rightful timing, which we're doing with modern science, then we invite these chaos forces into our weather, into this realm between the heavens and the earth, where meteorological events take place. So we have collectively crossed the threshold. We're in the first ABC stages of needing to learn magic, ideally white magic, as opposed to gray or black magic. The black magician strives for the core of the earth, for the 9th layer. So the resurrection is a mystery, but it's one that we should be pondering, because we live in a society where the death forces are extremely powerful. And it's this resurrection force that will allow us to win a battle against these forces. To the degree that humanity is able to absorb the knowledge of the Grail in the course of its development, the impulse given through the Christ event can become ever more meaningful. The inner side of Christian evolution will complement the outer more and more. What can be revealed about the higher worlds in relation to the mystery of the Christ through imagination, inspiration, and intuition will more and more permeate human thinking, feeling, and willing. The hidden knowledge of the Grail will be unveiled. It will increasingly pervade every expression of human life as by an inner power. We know that in occult science, Rudolf Steiner referred to spiritual science as a Grail science, and the future initiates as Grail initiates. This pertains to Rudolf Steiner himself. The mystery of Golgotha can only be approached with awe and wonder and reverence. And this little quote here can help to inspire that. Let us place before ourselves the mother, thought of as a virgin with Christ on her lap, and let us then make the statement, he who can have feelings of holiness before this image, he feels himself to be standing before the Grail, the holy chalice, the moon mother, now touched by Christ, the new Eve, bearer of Christ, the Sun Spirit, outshines all other lights, all other gods. Leon Claude de Herbois does a very beautiful job of bringing some of this mystery to expression. And we know that Easter, which occurs by looking to the heavens to set our calendars in the first Sunday after the spring equinox, but it's the first Sunday after that full moon that occurs after the spring equinox. And that is the Grail moon. In other words, this Christ mystery has to do with a cosmic dimension, which prepares the marriage of heaven and earth. This modern materialistic view of the heavens represents the death of Sophia, because we're not then lifting the veil. The veil of Sophia is the stars. That's the expression of the cosmic astral world. So all of this space travel and aliens is all leading us astray. To experience the Christ being as the solar logos, the cosmic Christ, who really is the 13th in the midst of the 12 constellations of the zodiac. This is an important imagination to bring into a connection with the descent of the Christ from the sun to the earth. Here we can see how there is a lawfulness that is reflected in the heavens in this life. You have a constellation that took place in 7 BC of the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter. Johannes Kepler looked to this as the star of the Magi, which in a certain respect, you could say it has something to do with that. Saturn is related more to the Nathan Jesus, the priestly, Jupiter to the kingly aspect. And with this conjunction, there's this coming together of these two. So the union of the two at the 12, age of 12, is then the Jupiter return. The Saturn return is at age 30, when the Christ being enters. The sun rhythm, which has 11-year rhythm, can be related to the 33-year rhythm. This conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter in a given sign takes 854 years to return to the same location with the advance of the vernal point on the equinox. And this same constellation was in the heavens in the 9th century when Parzival was crowned king of the Grail. Now we're familiar with the 4 kingdoms of the earth, where human beings are the crown of creation. But when we look upward, we have then 9-fold hierarchy, who together represent 3 sets of 3 hierarchies that are the means of the Trinity manifesting itself in the creation, in the evolution of humanity and the earth. But many of these hierarchies existed before the old Saturn, the old first stage of Earth evolution for human beings. And they too are evolving. So that the archai were at the human stage in old Saturn. The archangels on old Sun were in the human stage. The angels on old Moon. Some of those angels, archangels, and archai remain behind at those stages. And that's where we now have the backward archai, the Azurus, the backward archangel aspect in Ahriman, and the backward angels in Lucifer. Each of these have also a positive role to play, which we must not leave out of account. These beings are mentioned in the Foundation Stone meditation, which helps us in the process of crossing the threshold, which we've all been involved with for quite some time in human evolution, because the three soul forces divide, and we have to now consciously, out of our spiritual nature, harmonize them. We had a Waldorf education where willing is the first 7 years, feeling the second, and thinking the third. Then we've got a better start than most to bring about this harmonization. But most of us have not had that privilege. Here's another view of the Trinity that goes back to Valentin Tomberg. There are some deep mysteries surrounding this individuality that we don't have time to go into here. But here he brings the 7 I ams into relationship to the 7 chakras. And he then shows how juxtaposed to the Father God, there is the Mother God. To the Son, there is the daughter, the Sophia. To the Holy Spirit, there's the Holy Soul. This comes out of the Russian folk soul, which is where Tomberg, you could say, brings this Russian Slavic heritage, which is preparing the sixth age, which will be a Sophian age, where these mysteries of Sophia and the Mother will be more in the foreground. Now we live in the aftermath of a patriarchal period where the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are really an expression of that side of the Trinity, but there's a more hidden side that will be stronger in the future. We need to distinguish when we look into Christianity between the Johannine and the Petrine Christianity, between that which comes from Peter, who was told, "Thou art the rock, and upon this rock I will build my church," and this Johannine Christianity. So in the John Gospel, towards the end, I believe it's the 21st chapter, there is this situation where Peter, who had denied Christ 3 times, he has a difficulty with the mystery of evil. He was trying to talk Jesus into not going back to Jerusalem at this dangerous period when it was known that they were being sought. And Peter tried to talk him out of it. And after having said, "Peter, upon this church, this rock I will build my church," he said, "Get thee behind me, Satan." So this Petrine aspect of Christianity that you see in Augustine and later in the Catholic Church has a difficulty really dealing with the mystery of evil. Whereas Johannine Christianity has that as part of its task. And in that dialogue in the 21st chapter, Peter is told to follow him like 3 different times. And it was like a compensation for the 3 denials. And Peter then asks, well, what about him, indicating Johannes? And something to the effect of, what does it matter to thee if this disciple remains until the end of time? It's possibly not a perfect way of expressing what was said there, but the gist is, and John corrects that misunderstanding in that gospel, but it suggests that John is really the one who is preparing for the second coming, and Peter has more to do with the first coming. And of course, St. Paul is another important person in this. Now, John is the one who then wrote the Gospel of John, which has at the center of it the raising of Lazarus, which is a secret of the Gospel of John that Rudolf Steiner helps to clarify. But that's the first Christian initiation. But in the mystery of the Apocalypse, which was also written by John on the island of Patmos, is really the initiation of humanity, is at the core of that. And this relates to the 7 letters that are given to the 7 churches at the beginning. And it's in this Rosicrucian seal, you have the image of the resurrected Christ, the Logos, whose feet are like burning fire, who has a fiery sword coming out of his mouth, who has a white robe, who has hair. He's the elder. The 24 elders kind of work through him that govern time. But he is the ruler of time. In his right hand, you have then the symbols of the planetary stages of old Saturn, old Sun, old Moon. Earth is given 2 steps, the Mercury, the Mars and the Mercury stage. Then you have the Jupiter, Venus, and sometimes the Vulcan is not part of the picture because of the 2 being there for Earth. But anyways, part of this picture has to do with an esoteric lecture where Steiner indicated that in order to prepare for the 5th, 6th, and 7th ages of the post-Atlantean epoch, representatives of the 3 first ones, the ancient Indian, the ancient Persian, and the Egypto-Chaldean Babylonian, had to be raised from the dead. And these then would become leading figures in those 5th, 6th, and 7th ages. So the youth of 9 was the one who was raised from the dead, who represented the Egypto-Chaldean period. And he then is the leading figure who leads our 6th or 5th post-Atlantean age, which began in 1413 and will continue until 3573 with the age of Pisces, which is the letter to Sardis in this. And the future Slavic spirit self age that I spoke of a little earlier, the age of Philadelphia and Aquarius, this is when the Logos mysteries will be in the foreground. There, Lazarus John, who represent the Persian age, together with Zarathustra, who's like his twin. But he couldn't take on this task because he was the Solomon Jesus at the time. So he then will lead this 6th age. And in the 7th, you have a woman, the daughter of Jairus, who was raised from the dead to prepare for that epoch. So Steiner relates this at the beginning of that lecture to the three kings. And it's surprising how detailed this was recorded. It was recorded by Elizabeth Vrede, who was the head of the mathematical astronomical section. She obviously had a prolific memory because it's very well recorded. You were only allowed to write it down after when you got home. This is related to the raising of the youth of 9. And it's a sort of a repetition of the Egypto-Chaldean period in our present age. And here's some images of Mani, who lived as Manes or Mani between 216, I'm sorry, and 276 AD. And according to Rudolf Steiner, this youth had been the youth of Sais, celebrated in legend from Egypt. And then the youth became Mani after the youth of 9, and then Parzival. So this is the leading figure of our time and is very important in the Rosicrucian mysteries. It comes to expression here. Rudolf Steiner, in the book East in the Light of the West, lecture 9, the last of those lectures, speaks about a spiritual council, one of the most important that had ever taken place in history, where then Scythianos, Zarathustra, and a kind of earthly representative of Gautama Buddha, who no longer physically incarnated, participated, but they were centered around Mani, who was shown to stand above these others. And we know how advanced Zarathustra is, which tells us something about the being of Mani. Mani is really being prepared to become the future Manu. The present Manu is a being who didn't begin their evolution at the time when the rest of humanity did. He can be considered a demigod of sorts. But in the future, in the 6th epoch, Mani will take on that role. And so through these stages of initiation, he is preparing that. And just like in the Atlantean period, it was the 5th Atlantean age of the 7 Atlantean ages that was the ripe fruit that prepared our whole post-Atlantean, 5th post-Atlantean period. The 6th and 7th were overripe. So similarly, now the 5th epoch is preparing the 6th, and it's the 6th age that will epitomize the preparation for the whole 6th epoch. And Christian Rosenkreuz is preparing that age. And there's a close working of Christian Rosenkreuz and these 4 individuals who gathered then. They really prepared this Rosicrucian stream. Here I wanted to depict these 7 stages of planetary evolution and highlight this golden triangle. In the esoteric school, Steiner speaks of how this golden triangle was given to humanity through the Christ being. This golden triangle represents spirit self, life spirit, and spirit man, Manas, Buddhi, Atman, the 3 higher stages. They will lead us to the future Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan stages. The angels already embody spirit self, the archangels life spirit, the archai spirit man. So those are our teachers. And here I'm quoting, just as the higher ego is born in the individual, so the higher ego of all humanity, the divine ego, was born in Palestine. So here we hear a little bit more about this golden triangle. Christian Rosenkreuz, in his incarnation in the 18th century, as guardian of the innermost secret of the molten sea and the golden triangle, the secret may not yet be revealed. It remains the possession of a few initiated Christians. It is sealed up in the casting of the molten sea and in this golden triangle. It is the same as a secret belonging to Christian Rosenkreuz. To begin with, Christianity is bound up with the purely materialistic culture of the fourth and the fifth epochs, and the true Christianity of the future, which possesses the secret of the molten sea and the golden triangle, only exists secretly. This Christianity has another symbol, no longer that of the crucified Son of God, but the cross encircled by roses. This will become the symbol of the new Christianity of the sixth post-Atlantean epoch. Out of the mystery of the brotherhood of the Rose Cross will arise the Christianity of the sixth cultural epoch, which will recognize the significance of the molten sea and the golden triangle. The molten sea is what is created when the appropriate amounts of water and molten metal are cast. The three apprentices do it wrongly, and the casting is destroyed. But when the mysteries of fire are revealed to Hiram by Tubal-Cain, he is thereby enabled to unite water and fire in the proper way. This brings the molten sea into being. This is what the secret of the Rosicrucians is. It is brought about when the water of calm wisdom is united with the fire of the astral world, with the fire of passion and desire. A union must be brought about, which is of bronze, that is to say, is lasting and durable. It must endure into the next epoch when the secret of the sacred golden triangle is added to it, the secret of Atman, Buddhi, and Manas. This triangle, with all which it entails, will form the content of the renewed Christianity of the sixth cultural epoch. Now, the eighth sphere is this stage that we have to now face in a preliminary form in our time with the collective crossing of the threshold, because whenever you reach the fifth stage, you're dealing already with a preview of the future Jupiter condition. So we're not just recapitulating the past anymore, we're anticipating the future. And in order to make the transition between Earth and future Jupiter, we have to go through a pralaya period, cross an abyss. And some of humanity will cross it upward, which anthroposophy helps to do. But materialism actually leads us downward. Lucifer and Ahriman want to create their own kingdom, a kingdom that's woven of spectral forces. And that's what we're up against with this collective crossing of the threshold. Here we have the concept of the eighth sphere. The seven planetary evolutions correspond to the seven bodies. Besides this, there is an eighth sphere to which everything goes that cannot make any connection with the continuous evolution. This already forms itself as a predisposition in the devaconic state, when a human being uses the life on earth only to amass what is of service to himself alone, only to experience an intensification of his own egotistical self. This leads in Devachan into the condition of Avicii, hell. A person who cannot escape from his own separateness goes to Avicii. All these Avicii men will eventually become inhabitants of the eighth sphere. The other beings will be inhabitants of the continuing chain of evolution. It is from this concept that religions have formulated the doctrine of hell. The writer of the Apocalypse turns his clairvoyant attention to the fact that these people who are becoming one with matter, who are using up spiritual forces they possess like an old inheritance without joining company with Christ, such people would gradually lose Devachan. Kamaloka would last longer and longer, and they would be captured and united with the gravity of the earth. Steiner speaks most in the lecture series, The Occult Movement of the 19th Century, for people who want to go more deeply into this, especially the lectures number 4 and 5. I shared this slide in the last lectures I gave from natural science to spiritual science, but in the meantime, I added this reincarnation of Amos Comenius, who was Abu Yusuf, the Grand Qadi of Harun al-Rashid. Steiner speaks of him. And this Eighth Ecumenical Council played a very important role. It was directly connected with the impulse of the sun demon. So here we have an image of the Hagia Sophia, Constantinople. It's in Turkey now, turned into a mosque, very beautiful building. This is where this Eighth Ecumenical Council was held in 869. And it led to a division of the West into these 3 streams, into West, Middle, and East. This comes from René Carrido's Mystery of the Holy Grail. It was at that time that at this council where the abolition of the spirit, instead of threefold, it led to seeing the human being only as twofold. Rudolf Steiner has some interesting things to say about Nicholas I. He was incarnated in Steiner's time as this general who was leading the German army in the First World War. Here's something about Comenius, which gives a nuanced view of this court of Harun al-Rashid. Valentin André wrote The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz when he was 17 or 18 years old. And later, the Fama Fraternitas Rosae Crucis, followed by the Confessio of the fraternity. In his later years, André exchanged letters with the celebrated educator and esotericist Johann Amos Comenius. In 1620, André sketched for his friend the plan for a society, Christian society. The 30 Years' War destroyed all hope of bringing this plan to realization. That was the counter revolution, the counter Reformation by the Habsburgs, especially, and the Catholic Church. So André passed the torch to Comenius. You can read about this in Christian Rosenkreuz's anthology, compiled and edited by Paul M. Allen. See also Rudolf Steiner's lecture on Johannes Amos Comenius and the Temple of Pan Sophia. Rudolf Steiner indicated that Comenius was a man who came into contact with numerous secret fraternities in the course of his life. He entered into a real relationship with them, trying to influence them. How he came to influence them is particularly shown in what he says in Pan Sophia. Comenius, together with his friends Samuel Hartley and Theodor Haack and others, were subsequently instrumental in the forming of the Royal Society. Ernst Lehrs made an important contribution to this theme in his article, Rosicrucian Foundations of the Age of Natural Science. There's also an article by Ken Gibson in The Golden Blade. And there's another article that I mentioned below, and there's a book by Harold Hartley. They're interesting for this theme. Now, this is really what's missing from the natural science. In the 19th century, it showed itself through a particular phenomenon in a significant way. This is Rudolf Steiner speaking. When anybody with a little imagination cast an eye over the higher forms of culture in recent centuries, he made acquaintance at every turn with this objective creature, science, which came upon the scene in many different guises and claimed always to be the one and only genuine objective science. And having made its acquaintance, having this objective science continually introduced to one perceived that another being had stolen away bashfully because she felt that she was no longer tolerated, as if one were spurred to speak with this being. And if one was spurred to speak with this being secretly in the corner, she would say, I have a name which may not be uttered in the presence of objective science. I am called philosophy, Sophia, wisdom. But having the ignominious prefix love, Sophia, I have attached to me something that through its very name is connected with human inwardness, with love. I no longer dare to show myself. I have to go about bashfully, as objective science prides itself on having nothing of the philo in its makeup. It has also lost as a token the real Sophia. But I go on nevertheless, for I still have something of sublime within me, connected with feeling and with a genuine human quality. Here's a sort of an evolutionary pattern. This is taken from Sergei Prokofiev, The Heavenly Sophia and the Being of Anthroposophy, showing that this lowest member of the Sophia being really becomes Anthroposophy. And it shows that for every 1 year of our development, she has 100 years. So her sentient soul period lasted from 2100 BC to 700, her intellectual soul from 700 to 1400, and that then includes the period of the mystery of Golgotha. And then from 1400 to 35, she's going through her consciousness soul, and then leading over to spirit self. So this being kind of goes ahead of us. And in 2100, she reaches the human equivalent of what would be 42 years old. So she begins then her Anthroposophia, spiritual development. This just shows how, based on a few indications by Steiner in his karmic relationships lectures, that certain of these Arab Muslims, then aside from science being inspired physically, there's also this spiritual dimension where you have Darwin as the reincarnated commander who served the Umayyad Caliphate and led the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula and Spain and Portugal. Then you have Pierre Laplace, who was a significant astronomer, published 5 volumes, and a memorable conversation between him and Napoleon, where Napoleon mentions, you wrote this great book on astronomy and the heavens, but nowhere do you mention its creator. And he responds that he had no need of that theory. And then, of course, you have Woodrow Wilson, who played a significant role in the First World War. And he, according to Steiner, was this first caliph who began his caliphate 30 years after the death of Muhammad, and he was ruling from 661 to 680. And Woodrow Wilson, with his 14 points, played a dominant role in what led to the Treaty of Versailles and the punishment of Germany, which set the stage for Hitler to come later. Here I've kind of pulled together some indications of Steiner. It's kind of a busy slide. There is a time evolution from the left side of the screen in the middle to the right side of the screen in the middle. And there you have a lemniscate with a big side above the line and a small below. So that was 3101 BC. That was when the Kali Yuga began. We were mostly in the spiritual world in that evolutionary stage. Then in 747 BC, that's when the intellectual soul development began, the age of Aries. And the middle of that, between 747 and 1413, is 333. That's when there's a balance between above and below. The mystery of Golgotha occurs before that time in order to prepare a counterbalance for what's coming in 666, where the sun demon Zorat will give his first impulse. I'm showing them there's 3 impulses of Zorat, the second of which then is the time when the Knights Templars played an important role. And the third one is closer to our time in 1998. Steiner says that this is the most powerful one, and that we're now living in a time where the lemniscate is very big below the line into the material, but it's now, since the end of the Kali Yuga, it's moving in 1899, it's moving back to where the heavenly will become ever stronger. And when we reach the age of Aquarius, that balance will once again be reached, but now we will have taken the ego development that's developing in our time with us. So you have this picture of the circle with the star and the pentagram and the pentagon. These are relate to the 4 members of the human being. So the circle represents the ego, the pentagon, the astral body, the 5-pointed star, the large one, is the etheric body, and inside of that is a smaller pentagonal form that's turned downward. That's related to the physical body. Steiner speaks of this in the Wonders of the World series of lectures as a kind of way of living into the proportions. So when evil comes through the feet, it rises up and it enters into that sphere where the physical, where Ahriman has a power in the middle of the human being. That's where Ahriman wants to take the place of the Christ. If the Christ is not in the middle, in the human heart, everything depends on that, according to Steiner, then Ahriman is able to reach up to the head and pull the thinking downward to serve the lower nature. That upside down pentagonal form has its head in the lower nature of the human being. So the evil enters through the feet. If we only know materialism, then this downward, upside down pentagonal form starts to dominate. And we're on the way to gray and eventually black magic if we don't reverse course. And there's the 7-headed 10-horned beast, but then there's also the lamb with 7 horns. And that's what this star with 7 points represents. It has 7 eyes. It's a balanced figure as opposed to the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. So the Knights Templars were the victims of the second thrust of the sun demon working through Philip le Bel at the time. They were part of the early Crusades. They were given the El Asq Mosque as a place to reside, and that's quite near to the Dome of the Rock. This is where Solomon's Temple once stood. And this Philip le Bel, who was an instrument of this sun demon, had a special relationship to gold. He would go into his treasury and literally kind of bathe in the gold. Gold has a relationship to the sun, and the sun has its sun demon. And Zorat is that sun demon. And so this Philip le Bel expressed some of these Zorat forces where he took pleasure in the pain of this torturing of the knights, which eventually led to the burning of many of these knights charged with heresy. And this is a time when the Pope, Philip IV, Pope Clement V, and Philip IV were presiding, and especially Clement became an instrument of this working of the king who was aligned to the sun demon. And this is often referred to as a time when the Pope was in kind of captivity, where the residence was shifted from Rome to Avignon, France. So it's kind of a papal co-opting. So I've shown this in other presentations, showing that there are 7 unutterable mysteries related to each stage of time. And when we live in the 5th age, we're dealing with the mystery of evil. And that is then related to this collective crossing of the threshold. The future spirit self age, it'll be the mystery of the logos. So the brothers of the left, the forming of the founding of the Royal Society in 1660 had been preceded by a tumultuous period in British history involving 2 civil wars that began soon after the ascent of Charles I to the throne of England in 1625 after the death of his father, James I. These wars arose out of disputes between King Charles and Parliament, as well as out of religious tensions. Oliver Cromwell played a leading role in events that culminated in the execution of Charles I in 1649 and the subsequent exile of his son, Charles II, for 9 years. Cromwell, who had become a virtual dictator, was named Lord Protector of England, Scotland, and Ireland in 1653. Was within this, the circle of influence focused on the figure of Cromwell, that a betrayal of Freemasonry involving the use of occult knowledge to achieve political ends began to take shape. He was able to prepare the ground for the future Anglo-American world power. In 1653, he set up in its initial form the institution that developed into the English Intelligence Service, which undertook the founding of the first English Masonic Lodge on the continent. He thereby fostered a certain orientation within Freemasonry. Cromwell was a supreme representative of this consciousness of the British as the chosen people and having a mission to fulfill. These tendencies were explained by Rudolf Steiner. Now, in occult directions of this kind, there is this basic doctrine that the English-speaking people represent for the 5th post-Atlantean period what the Roman people were for the 4th post-Atlantean period. He went on to say that there is the view that the Anglo-Saxon race has, through certain forces of world development, to be assigned the mission of exercising in the present and for future centuries into the future world rule real worldwide dominion. You can read about this in Hans Pfeiffer, The Brothers of the Shadows, as well. Steiner often referred to the brothers of the left who propagated and sought to implement a form of Anglo-American imperialism through Masonic lodges, spread far and wide in Europe and the United States, but centralized in the Grand Lodge of England. This Grand Lodge has gone so far as to assert its supreme authority over all the lodges throughout the world. According to David Noble, at the start of the documented history of speculative Freemasonry in the 1720s, 20s, 1 out of every 4 English Freemasons was a fellow of the Royal Society. So it was very strong in furthering science as well. Now, Rudolf Steiner, one of his last conversations, this was with Polzner-Hoditz, who was a very close and intimate student. This was kind of not long before he died. He reports, "Then we spoke about the activity of the Roman Catholic and Western lodges, and with great earnestness had Dr. emphasized that 3 problems were to be solved, the result of which would be of very special importance for the future. 1, the question about the 2 John beings, John the Baptist and John the Evangelist. 2, who was Demetrius, Tsar Dmitry of Russia, 1605 to 1603. 3, where did Caspar Hauser come from? In all of these, it is especially important that one's gaze is not directed towards the death of the subject, but towards the birth. Where did they come from? And with what task? The individuality hidden behind the veil of Caspar Hauser is a being who has worked inspiringly into Rosicrucian connections from the beginning and has incarnated on the 29th of September, 1812, as the son of the Grand Duke Karl of Baden and his wife, Stephanie de Beauharnais. This individuality has an important task of esoteric Christianity to fulfill." You can read more about this if you're interested in the book by Ludwig or about Ludwig Polzner-Hoditz, Conversations with Rudolf Steiner. That book is published by Temple Lodge. It's by T.H. Meyer, and it's 600 and some pages, so it's fairly lengthy. Another valuable source for this is in German by Marcus Osterreiter, published by Freies Geistesleben. It's called Welt in Umbruch. The world is undergoing a tremendous transition. And the question of nationality, the planning and order, and Rudolf Steiner's views about the First World War. This book is also very lengthy. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000, or wait a minute, yeah, 1,600 some pages. So there's many sources related to this that one can pursue. Here's just some pictures that relate to this theme, where the occult brotherhoods were working through this Lord Stanhope, and has Freemasonic connection. There is a book about this in German called Lord Stanhope, the counter player to Caspar Hauser, published by Urachhaus. And it's, again, a very sort of 600 and something page book with lots of pictures, etc., going into his history. But there's many other authors like Karl Heyer, who wrote about a book on Caspar Hauser. David Nublat got together with this other anthroposophical author who some of you are probably familiar with, Terry Boardman. He's also spent a lot of time working with these kinds of machinations of the Western Brotherhoods, but they collaborated on a book on Caspar Hauser. Where did he come from? Anyways, the idea is that this being had a very high and important task. Rudolf Steiner indicated that he would have played a role in helping Middle Europe to come into its own, where the ground that had been prepared by Goethe, Schiller, Novalis, and many others would have been embraced by him if he would have been allowed to come into his own. But these brothers of the left, which include the Jesuits and the Freemasons, saw that this was a very high being. They knew if they just killed him, he could reincarnate rather rapidly. So instead, what happened, they took advantage of ambitions of this Countess Hochberg, who was another part of this lineage. This Stephanie de Boharis, the mother of Caspar Hauser, was an adopted daughter of Napoleon. And Napoleon had, of course, gotten into European politics and was establishing his influence through these types of marriages. So anyways, this child was born on September 29th on a Michaelmas day, 1812. And you have then this child was stolen away and replaced with a dying child. According to certain research, this child was then kept for a couple of years in a certain family, and then around the age of 3 was imprisoned in this castle shown on the bottom left, that's on the Rhine River. And he was kept in a cage like the cage on the right, and he wasn't allowed to stand up. They knew that this standing up has to do with the ego coming in. He was often drugged when food or change of clothes was given. Anyways, he found him after they believed that they had done enough damage to prevent this soul by having kept him in a kind of a limbo state between heaven and earth. They had hoped that they would prevent him from fulfilling his destiny. He was then delivered to Nuremberg, and that was on May 26, 1824. But he soon became an enigma for the whole of Europe. He was called the child of Europe, and many people took an interest in him, including a lawyer who was beginning to investigate like a detective and was on the path of what was really happening. And that's where these English Freemasons began to see that their plan wasn't working. And so there was a first attempt on his life where he was badly wounded but survived. And they tried to spoil him. Lord Stanhope came in, and they tried to lead him off his path through tutoring and influence. That didn't work either, so they decided to murder him. He was murdered on 1833. And 100 years later, Hitler arises, you could say, in the vacuum that arose in Middle Europe due to the fact that this individuality wasn't allowed to play his rightful role. Steiner indicated that Hiram Abiff was reborn as Lazarus and so became the first to be initiated by Christ. With him began the stream of the center between the stream of Cain and Abel. Over the course of time, the Cain stream found its chief representative in the Freemasonic stream, while the Abel tradition came to expression in the priestly Jesuit stream of the Catholic Church. These two streams of humanity remained in fierce enmity. Only in one way did they unite in peace in their hatred of the stream of the middle, the center. The result of this unification of the two otherwise warring streams was the destruction of the St. John building, the Goetheanum. We have the anniversary of that coming up on the 31st of December of this year, and New Year's we'll have the 100th anniversary of the burning of this beautiful building, a very tragic stage in the evolution of the Anthroposophical movement and society. Now, I know our time is getting too long here, so I'm going to have to draw this to a close, even though we're only partway through. I think what I'll need to do is to see if I can do a second version of this so that you have an opportunity to chime in and provide, questions, etc. Here I'm just showing of the Rudolf Steiner in his Apocalypse course, which was given in Nuremberg. He gave a timing that placed the trumpets in the seventh epoch of the Earth, the very last stage of Earth evolution before the transition to the prolaya that leads over to the Jupiter condition or the New Jerusalem. But in the lecture series given in September, on the 17th of September, 1924, he stated he was giving then a consciousness soul interpretation of this book of Revelation. And there he said, the sixth angel began to sound his trumpet at the beginning of the 1840s, and he will continue to sound it until the end of the 20th century, when the trumpet of the seventh angel will begin to sound. In the realm of the consciousness soul, as a civilized human beings, we are in the second woe. So the third woe is actually our time. And this threshold event can be seen as a prelude to the great future transition, prolaya, that will take place at the very end of the Earth stage of evolution, planet of wisdom, that leads over to the future Jupiter stage, the planet of love, referred to as the New Jerusalem in the book of Revelation. The great division of humanity that will occur at that future time is being telescoped as a preview into our time as the collective encounter with the lower guardian of the threshold. This involves the intervention of the three classes of adversarial beings, Luciferic, Ahrimanic, and Azuric, that oppose the progressive human evolution initiated and sustained by the ninefold hierarchies in the service of the divine Trinity. These adversarial forces are collectively aligned to the Zorat being, the sun demon, who seeks to usurp the rightful rulership of Christ, who through the mystery of Golgotha became the planetary spirit of the earth. This battle for the future earth is focused at the very center of the earth. This is expressed in the red window, and Rudolf Steiner deals with this, especially in the first class lessons. Today, humanity as such is experiencing the meeting with the guardian of the threshold. This is also the beginning of the split of humanity, and this signifies a critical point in time at which we have now arrived. So here we have a picture of the crossing of the threshold. And you have a red pillar on the left, a blue pillar on the right. This is related to the 11th chapter. This being appears in the book of Revelation in the 10th chapter. He has a book that John is invited to eat, and it would taste like honey in his mouth, but bitter in his belly. 7 thunders utter their voices. So I'm relating this to eugenic, hygienic, mechanical occultism. The East, which is related to the birth pillar on the left, has to do with the mysteries of eugenic occultism, the birth mysteries. The West, Ahriman, is the dominant factor there, has to do with mechanical occultism. And that's especially the West has a special predisposition to that. Middle Europe, the hygienic. And we all need to pass through this middle, this straight and narrow path in order to avoid the danger on the left and right, where the Luciferic dragon will arise out of the astral ocean on the left and the Ahrimanic two-horned beast out of the dry land on the right. We need the threefold social order to meet this. I want to then end with this theme. This is the working of the angel in the human astral body. These are the 3 gifts of the Holy Spirit. The aspiring angels, the future ideals. One is impulse towards brotherhood. Another is seeing the hidden divinity in all fellow human beings. And the third is to reach the spirit through thinking. Brotherhood for bodily life, freedom in the religious life, and spiritual science for the spiritual life. And this then, if human beings don't wake up to what the angels are weaving in the astral body, Steiner indicated that then these 3 gifts turn into an inverted form. And you will then have a perverted form of eugenic occultism that comes to expression in sexual aberrations, baleful form of hygienic occultism that comes to expression in medical practices that will have negative influence, and a negative form of mechanical occultism. So this, he says, would begin before the 3rd millennium, that this weaving of the angels in the astral body would be underway. So one can see by this how it's related to this collective crossing of the threshold, and that these 3 perverted forms have to do with not crossing this threshold with the help of the Christ being in the etheric, who is working through the angels, weaving into our astral body. And so let me stop there, and I'll stop my screen sharing.
Yeah, so dear Florian, thank you so much for your very intense presentation. And before we going to flow into questions and answers section, so why don't we take a break? And so Florian will be refreshed afterwards. And we will be back in 3-4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dear friends, Florian lives in Honolulu, and you can hear all these exotic birds from his backyard. It's amazing. They have like probably 4 or 5 different kinds of pigeons. Exotic. As wild birds. Okay, Florian is back. Uh-huh. Mhm. Dear friends, recordings, yes. I'm just answering the question from chat. Yes, recording will be available, but you should give me probably 2 days for it, because we're going to download it on YouTube. And by the way, I would suggest to subscribe to be member of our channel, which is Rudolf Steiner branch. So you should visit our website and then visit our YouTube channel and be a member. So we have around 60 videos already. So please use this possibility. Okay, dear friends, so Florian is back. Florian, are you good?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, all right, let's proceed. Dear friends, if you have questions, so in the bottom of your screen, so you have a sign reaction, click on it, and there's big button, raise the hand. So, and if you have a question, just go ahead, raise your hand and ask your question. Okay. Yuri, so go ahead, you're first. Please unmute your computer. Yuri from St. Petersburg, medical doctor, anthroposophical doctor. Uh-huh.
Hello, Florian. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Yuri.
Florian, for your wonderful presentation. I wonder, because you mentioned this Masonry and Cromwell, I wonder whether you come across in Rudolf Steiner's or in other sources about Newton, who used to be a chief Mason in London after Cromwell. I read a book when I was in the Nottingham Library that Newton was the chief, the head of the Freemasonry at that time. And especially, I wonder why the experts like Robert Collins, who wrote his book Freemasonry and the Occult at the Court of Peter the Great, he is not aware about Newton's position. And I mention this because it was kept in the secret by Masons, and by now there are about 5 sources in Russia, some writers who discovered that what we know as the person Peter the Great was the fake Peter the Great, and the origin Tsar's destiny is not known, and Peter was taken most likely by the Masons, because what Robert Collis, the expert on the Freemasonry, writes, he considers that Peter the Great was the chief of the Freemasonry in Russia. And we know that the year 1698 was the fatal year for the Russian Tsar Peter, whose destiny, as I said, is unknown since then. So the question is, have you heard about Newton's position and his role in the destiny of Europe? Because changing the Tsar is a great project of British Empire, and especially this secret brotherhood. As we know, since then, Rudolf Steiner mentioned that Russia changed its main approach from the patriarch style of life to the British one, which is not the right path for Russia at that time. And since then, we know that all the politics has the tinge of the secret brotherhoods operating from the British side. So sorry for this long question, but please tell now what you know about Newton.
Well, Newton was the head of the Royal Society for quite a few years, and he, aside from his scientific work, was very deeply involved in the study of alchemy and the occult arts. So there's quite a few writings of Newton's that exist that have to do with this other dimension that modern science, of course, leaves out generally when they celebrate Newton. As I said, the Royal Society, a quarter of its members were members of the Freemasonic Society as well. And that was a very important area, which included the influence of the Rosicrucians, because Freemasonry goes back to the Temple legend, and the Temple legend originates from Christian Rosenkreuz, according to Steiner. And it was shared in a very short, small circle and interpreted among them, and then it was given to wider circles. But in the English theater, it started to become more political since Cromwell's time. And I don't believe that Newton was so much involved in that political side of Freemasonry, but he was involved in one of the goals of these Western brotherhoods is to spread scientific materialism across the planet as much as possible. And of course, English colonialism was most successful with its empire reaching into India and China with Hong Kong, etc. That's why the English language has found its way. Like I do architectural work. I have somebody from India, a lady who does my drafting work. And it's because of the English education over there that a lot of people there speak good English. But what they wanted to do, these English imperialists, is keep science and religion separate from each other in the wider world at large. Keep the old world in its old religions and spread science around the planet, but bridge the two, which leads to a spiritual science only within their own circles, which is then leads to occult knowledge, which they put in the service of English imperialism, which then is not for the sake of all of humanity. So they are committing what Steiner called the sin against the Holy Spirit. And Russia figured in very strongly to their machinations because they believed, as was expressed in one of those later slides, that the fourth age belonged to the period when the Latin peoples, especially the heritage from Rome, was in the foreground, and that these Latin peoples were then the educators, according to their doctrine, of the northern people, which included the English, the Germans, the French in their earlier stage of evolution. And this northern peoples were like the babies stage. They were like children, so they needed to be cared for. And they viewed then the Latin people as having that role. Then a child grows a little older, then it needs a guardian. That's when the Pope came in out of that Latin culture. So they believe they have a similar role now as the dominant guiding force of the fifth post-Atlantean age, to do the same for Russia as the Latin people did for England and France and Germany, etc., from childhood through youth, etc. So one of the things that they have done is to import socialism, which was very much present in Middle Europe. And they did so with the help of Wall Street, which also didn't want socialist influences from Marx, Lenin, etc., to flourish in Middle Europe. So some of these people rather, in the Second World War leading up to that, Hitler, the right wing. And so these English imperialists were very much involved in exporting socialism into Russia. And they had people on the ground who supported every socialist faction. They were kind of disguised as people who were working for the Red Cross, had a lot of money that came from various sources. And they then continued to cultivate this process into the present. So this was one of their strategies. The other, they wanted to keep Germany and Russia apart. They didn't want an alliance of Germany and Russia because that could overpower England, their home base, so to speak. And the other threat was Germany was a very strong economy. It had the power to also contest their dominant of the fifth period. So that's what led to the division of Germany in the Second World War. It wasn't the Russians that decided where the line would be, cutting Germany in half. It was actually the Anglo-Americans that decided that. At the Treaty of Versailles, the punishment on Germany was brought about by agents of these Anglo-American factions who insisted on these very strict consequences. So we're like in the aftermath, living in a time where we're in the aftermath of these kinds of manipulation of world history. Because as soon as you cross the threshold with imperialistic tendencies, you come under the spell of Lucifer and Ahriman. and they are then used, these people gain power, but they're used by these adversarial forces in history.
Right. I just wanted to bring your attention to the current events in the world. I would like to say that because of that event in the past with the fake Peter, now we can see that the modern politics which is attributed to Russia, it is actually the British one, because Russia is no longer independent. It doesn't have sovereignty for a long time, virtually since then, since 1698. All this stage, all this appearance, external appearance, it just for those who is not studying geopolitics and Rudolf Steiner's indications. So just to our anthroposophical friends and you, it would be good to know about these details and to assess the modern situation. Because at that time, the so-called Great Embassy, which in history we have this title for the Peter the Great traveling to London, and they never mentioned the meeting with the prominent scientist Newton, and we can wonder why they keep silence till now, and now you know why, because Newton was the chief of Mason in Britain, and also he was responsible for the money reform in England at that time. And then we could see with the fake Peter, we also had this money reform and lots of new undesirable implements into our politics and external politics and inner life of the people, of the Russian people. So you can just put a note into your sort of at the back of your mind when at any time you consider the modern events in the world, especially with the nuclear threat from the Russian state. Thank you.
So thank you
Rudolf
very
Steiner,
much.
go ahead.
Yeah, you. So are you going to answer, Florian, on statement of Yuri? Yeah,
Well,
go ahead.
I'll just say there's a map that plays an important role that's attributed to Peter the Great, and as though this were sort of embodying Russian ambitions that play a role in secret societies and of that time. And Boardman speaks of that in his book on mapping the millennium. I don't know, it looks like it's turning backwards on my screen here, but Rudolf Steiner supported the publication of a book by Caspar Hauser that is called Entente, Freimaurerei und Weltkrieg. It's Entente, Freemasonry, and World War, a contribution to the history of the World War and to the understanding of the true Freemasonry. It's not available in German, in English, but it's available in German. And Steiner wrote us anonymous forward to it, as well as contributing money to its publication. So he was trying to shed light on some of these influences that took place back then. But I think for the moment, let's see if anybody else has, other people have questions or contributions they'd like to make.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, we have two people with questions. So, and Leon is first. Leon? Unmute your computer, please.
I worked at University of California, Davis, and one of my colleagues was Betty Jo Dobbs, D-O-B-B-S. She wrote a wonderful book on Newton, in which she showed that his main task in life was the interpretation of the revelation. And I looked at his work on astrology, and he had an argument with Halley about the validity of astrology. He said to Halley, "I have studied the matter, you have not." That's the way he dealt with the argument. So I see him more as a transitory figure in the old science to the new science. And I would question, not necessarily go against the idea that he was so influential in this manner. I would accuse Newtonians following him for doing most of the damage in the colonies and so on. My question relates to one of the subjects mentioned in your outline, climate change, which to me, as someone who's taught environmental science and worked in that area, is a very questionable issue. And I wondered if you could outline anything that Steiner said about that, global warming, as a real issue or not.
Well, I think in Steiner's time, the world population was very small compared to where we are currently. And so it was obviously not yet a issue in terms of global sort of repercussions from our industrial development at that time. I know the Steiner built on the Romantics, and they were very much critical of the kind of environmental damage that was being done in the first industrial revolution that was taking place in England and spreading from there, and the way it affected people. Steiner spoke of, I recall one place where I was reading where he kind of points to Goethe, who looked at a time when before the loom, the mechanical loom came into play, the weavers would often be in a little cottage in a setting surrounded by nature, and they would hear the birds singing and weave in some of those experiences into their work. And that, you know, the Luddites obviously were rebelling against that mechanical loom coming into play and taking away their old form of livelihood and giving more power to the managers and the wealthy class. So I think on the level of the threefold social order, but also when he points and deals with the school of Chartres, for example, you have these, I think, were the first environmentalists in many respects. There's the image of the goddess Natura that arises in some of their writings, and where the garment of the goddess Natura has all the animals and plants woven into it, and that it's being torn and destroyed by human beings who have lost touch with this devotion to the goddess and the soul of nature. So that when the spirit was denied, that's just a step that comes from Gundi Shapur in 869 led to the denial of the spirit. The next step is the denial of the soul. And in the cosmic sense, it's projecting scientific materialism, which Newton had something to do with, onto the cosmos, because only what can be weighed, measured, and counted. In the Royal Society, subjective thinking was not embraced. It was seen as related to our inner and feeling life, and even our thought life was considered subjective, which is where Steiner was especially strongly fighting against that view, because his philosophy of freedom points to the importance of human thinking, that we can intuit the thought world that's behind the phenomena, that the thought world is akin to the world of imagination. So you have on this higher level, truth, beauty, and goodness are like three altars to the divine. And nature embodies that divine beauty. So if you deny that beauty, if you destroy it the way our modern industry is doing, you're sinning against this realm of the heart forces and the middle realm that's related to beauty, just like thinking to truth. Beauty is related to the feeling life and the cultivation of love. This love is meant to be extended from the human beings upward to the hierarchies, but also downward to the kingdoms of nature. That's part of our task. And the environmental crisis, which includes, global warming, is very much destroying that fabric that the goddess Natura wore in the guise that she was seen by these enlightened souls that Steiner pointed to as being very significant in the school of Chartres. But I think also in the biodynamic movement, there was a impulse towards caring for the land, working with the elements of earth, air, water, fire in a very sensitive way, so that he spoke about how the electrical wires were finding their way everywhere. But compared to how it is now, it was, of course, very little of that electrification was underway at that time. So he then saw this invasion of the electrical as something that needed to be housed in an appropriate building, which he did near the Gothianum, this rectilinear building, unlike his other more round structures. In the Waldorf classroom, they seek to bring in beauty, and they seek to have a relationship to nature with the children. So I think there is a built-in environmentalism in Goethean science, in the Steiner's approach to biodynamic farming, etc. Not specifically global warming, because that has to do with greenhouse gases, which weren't a factor back then, ozone holes and things of this sort. I don't know if that kind of relates to your question.
If I could reply, I agree that there are many issues in these areas of environment that we need to address and transform ways that we work. My question, though, relates more to the issue that it's being weaponized, as it were, in the present time, with movements in Europe and in America, especially Green New Deal, for instance, with a lot of pie in the sky kind of thinking about electrification, not realizing, it seems, that the electricity has to be created and there are no ways of producing the amount of electricity required. And throughout my life, there have been numerous predictions of doom, like with when I started teaching about, say, the greenhouse effect in 1970, it was the zero population guy, and it's been associated with this zero population approach, or some need to reduce population, again, unproven, throughout the years, where there's been a prediction of doomsday, which has been and gone. And now we're told, you know, it's another 10 years. It's been like that for my life, which has been 80 years. And so that's why I raised the question. We're living in turmoil right now, because if this were actually the case, it's not being handled in a reasonable fashion.
Well, as soon as knowledge becomes politicized, it takes on this dimension of power, and certain groups then seek to use these areas of concern as a kind of political weapon, like you say. You have right now an election in Brazil between Bolsonaro and this Lulu fellow who was in jail for a time.
Yeah.
And Bolsonaro was gung-ho with, you know, cutting down the Amazon. He's considered a mini Trump of the tropics. And when Trump came into power, he was aggressively placing people in the EPA, for example, who were involved in anti-environmental movement, and inviting a renewal of let's bring coal back, etc. So on the right-wing side, you have dissing of the environmental movement. On the left, you have an embracing of the environmental movement. And again, when these things are politicized, then they get distorted. But I think as anthroposophists, we have to rise above that and use our own tuitions that are schooled with the help of Goethean science, where a love for the earth and the environment should play a role. And, you know, young people see the environmental damage as a threat, because they're the ones, you're 80 years old, let's say now, but the young people see the changes happening in their lifetime and are worried. And I don't think it's just political rhetoric either. There's actual scientific evidence that shows the environmental damage. We're in the 6th great extinction of animals right now, bird species, mammals, etc. So I think this is a real threat. And there are some people who have gone out of their way to study these things, who are spokesmen, who don't have a political agenda, that I think we should be listening to.
Okay. Yeah, dear friends, so we have one more person with the questions. So it's from Loan. And I believe we're going to conclude our session after the answer. Okay, Waldemar, sure. Loan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I have a question that I'd like to go back to the Treaty of Versailles with. And it's my understanding, and correct me if it's wrong, but there's been no mention of the Middle East in relation to the Treaty of Versailles. And during the Treaty of Versailles, Gertrude Bell, who was well known, and my understanding is she actually helped draw the boundary for Iraq. She and Lawrence of Arabia were at the Treaty of Versailles, but were not allowed to speak. And because of that, I have a question of how did that contribute to our world situation today?
Well, I think the Middle East has been especially important, like the first industrial revolution had to do with steam, and then only gradually did the combustion engine and electricity and electrical motors come into play. But you can see these different stages of industrial revolution overlap. And right now, currently, for example, there's a lot of movement towards electric vehicles to cut down on emissions, et cetera. And yet we're heavily dependent for our electricity on the use of fossil fuels, oil and gas. And we can see right now with Europe being in trouble with their dependence on Russian sources of oil and gas, and this new sort of attempt to punish Russia for its war in Ukraine by avoiding using gas and oil from Russia. And the English very early on, who had a strong role to play in the Treaty of Versailles, valued the fact that they could have an influence on those oil reserves, and that meant having political influence in those areas. I'm not familiar with the input from Lawrence of Arabia or the lady you mentioned in the Treaty of Versailles, but I think the English imperialists saw that as an important area to take into account at the time.
So thank you very much. So, and very, very last, because of Waldemar from Brazil. Yeah, dear Waldemar, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to make, well, thank you, everybody, especially Florian, for the nice lecture. I wanted to speak something about Newton that was not mentioned here, but Florian mentioned Brazil, so I'm going to speak just a little bit about that. Just figure out our situation. Tomorrow will be the second turn of the presidential elections with two candidates. One is the president, Bolsonaro, who is an extreme rightist. He wants to destroy the Amazon forest because he thinks that we have to colonize it. We have to plant there, I think. And but this is wrong, because the soil is very, very poor. The forest maintains itself. And when the forest is cut, with the heavy rains, what is left is just sand. So the Amazon is being turned into a desert, not a savanna, as people say, but in a real desert. And the other candidate, Lula, I think is the highest corrupt person in the world. There has been proven that his corruption, corruption in his government went up to billions of dollars. Part of them were returned to the country. So there is absolutely no doubt about that. Well, that's the problem we have tomorrow. That's I'm going to take advantage of my age, and I'm not going to vote. I have the possibility of doing that because voting here is obligatory, but not for old people. The other thing I wanted to mention about Newton is the following. I think it's very important. Newton's theory of gravitation was just a theory. It was an abstraction, but it was the end of the geocentric view of the world, So by a strict abstract theory, people ended up ended with their view of the world, of the planets and the solar system as being centered on the Earth. And everybody began to believe that the center was the sun. It was his theory. But it's very interesting to note that there was no physical proof, physical experience that proved that the sun was the center of the planetary system. This came only with Foucault about 200 years later. So this is very interesting from our anthroposophical point of view, because it shows how the power of abstraction had at that time evolved to the point that people changed completely their way, their way of regarding the planetary system, right? So I think this is one of the most important contributions of Newton. You know, he ended up with the old traditions, the religious traditions. I don't know if you know that the idea of the geocentric model was based by the church on saying by I don't know how to say that in English, Josue, that you know, that was the follower of Moses, and he said in a certain point, sun stop and moon stop and so on, right? And this was the basis for the church to keep the old geocentric model, which was destroyed by a pure abstraction by Newton. He's the gravitational model, gravitational theory. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
One of the things Steiner brings up is that the Copernican sun-centered system is true for the physical plane, but the geocentric Ptolemaic system is true for the astral plane. So that the time that we spend between death and rebirth, the geocentric view helps us to understand that journey through the planetary spheres and our connection to the planetary system that is involved there. And I think, like you say, in Brazilian politics right now, one is left with the question of which is the lesser of evils if one is going to vote. And we're faced with that on many levels. So it's always, what else can we do besides engaging in politics to bring about change? Obviously, we're so very far away from the threefold social order, which Rudolf Steiner advocated, and all the money that goes into politics, the religious right is one of the things Bolsonaro is bringing in, Putin is bringing it in. You had it in America with Trump, and it's then related to white nationalism in America. So we're dealing with many of these things that, as long as materialistic science is successful in convincing human beings that they're just a physical body, the more our identity will be restricted to genetics, heredity, race, color of skin, and we won't get beyond that to what's universally human, the higher self that can create a new form of community that is not based on blood, but rather on soul spiritual kinship and discovering what's universally human in each and every one of us. So that's part of the challenge we face. We're in a time when there's a resurgence of racial doctrines and right-wing and left-wing politics. and compromises in the middle would be lukewarm. So I think we have to find other avenues to work besides, modern political possibilities.
Okay, thank you very much, dear friends. Thank you very much, Florian. Florian, so about part 2, we have to decide.
Sure.
And so I will email you, but anyway, it's December 3rd is great and it's available for you. So just let me know later, so I will send announcements.
Okay.
So dear friends, yeah, I would like to just invite you for an event which will be in 1 week from today. And we have Mary Stuart Adams speaking for us. And her presentation, it's Season of the Dead in 3 acts. So I sent already announcements, so we're waiting for you. Please come and hear this very intriguing topic. So it's November 5th, 2 p.m. Central Time, US, and please just check time in your regions. So, and now I'd like to thank once more, and dear friends, please feel free to unmute your computers, and thank you to Florian. Florian, thank you so much again and again. Yes, and yeah. And
Thank you, Florian.
Oh, very welcome.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Florian.
Thank you, Florian.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you, Florian.
Wonderful.
Thank
you
you
so
and
much.
bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Florian.
Aloha from Hawaii.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Florian.
Aloha, aloha.
Thank you, Voldemort, for the articles you sent me. Leon.
Thank you, Florian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yuri.
Yuri, for joining us. It was important to me, at least. Okay, good night, friends, or good morning. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.